What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Eye on the U. It's your host, Andre Fernandez, once again joined by our University of Miami beat writer, Jordan McPherson, talking some Canes off season. Eventful couple of weeks since we were last doing this show together, Jordan. Mainly Carson Beck time. How about that? Miami gets a quarterback, not just any quarterback. They get a quarterback with experience at the highest levels to come in to replace Cam Ward for next season. A lot of excitement around the program now with the addition of Carson Beck. We'll talk a little bit about how that happened. What is Miami getting in Carson Beck? And we'll have an injury update, of course, on how he's doing. And we'll look at another big acquisition. We'll look at new defensive coordinator Corey Hetherman. Look at his background, what he potentially could bring to the table to the U. Long coaching road before coming to Miami, as we know. A lot of time in D2, D3 before he got there. And this Xavier Lucas thing is pretty crazy, coming from Wisconsin and transfer portal, not transfer portal. I mean, kind of a mess there. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we're recording this on a Tuesday morning, right after Ohio State wins the national championship, defeating Notre Dame in a pretty good game, though. A game that it looked like at first was going to be a blowout and then wasn't. We'll talk a little bit about that and what Miami can kind of take away from the playoffs. The first 12-team playoffs are in the books. We'll kind of take a look at where Miami kind of can look at toward the future is that. And a casual reminder, of course, Miami opens the season against the national runners-up Notre Dame at Hard Rock Stadium, the place where the national title game will be in 2026. But before all that, like we said, Carson Beck time. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was impeccable timing because we record our episode right before we start going to the Orange Bowl, and we're talking about different quarterback options. You're like, okay, if Quinn Ewers ends up going in, yeah, because Carson was already in the draft.
Right.
Not even maybe, I think, 2.5, 3 hours after we finished recording, the news dropped, oh, yeah, Beck's not going to the draft. He's entering the transfer portal. And I'm just like, oh, crap. We literally just did this. And, of course, Miami was viewed as the favorite.
Never fails.
Yeah. A couple days later, it goes from he's in the portal to, okay, it's official. He's coming to Miami. And it's a big get for Miami. I mean, obviously, he's hurt right now. He had elbow surgery, essentially something similar to Tommy John. I don't think it was actually Tommy John, but UCL in his right elbow, injured it during the SEC championship game. From what we were told by Mario Cristobal, it's unlikely he throws during spring practices, but he's already on campus. He's already learning the playbook. He's already in team meetings. He's already learning his teammates, which if you can't throw and you can't be part of the practices, at the very least, that's the biggest thing he can possibly do is at least build the rapport so that once he can start throwing in the summer, it's not like he's completely learning everything from scratch. In terms of what they're getting a guy who's been a starter for the last 2 years in the SEC for a top power like Georgia. He was fantastic 2 years ago, 2023. He was great. Numbers dropped back a bit this year, only completed about 65% of his passes through 12 picks, which is tied for the most among quarterbacks at Power 4 schools this year. But he has the ability to make the big plays. He's a veteran. He's not going to be coming in blind or fresh or having to basically learn how to be a starting quarterback, which Miami needs because, again, replacing a guy like Cam Ward who just rose the standards here at Miami so much that they need somebody to make sure that they can try to at least keep pace with what they did last year. Carson Beck, based off the options they had, gives them the best chance to do that.
Not only that, and look, they lost the Notre Dame without him. So, I mean, I don't know if that, maybe the result, who knows, maybe the result's the same with him or not, but it begs the question, how much of a difference could he have made in that game for Georgia in the playoffs? But I like the fact that nothing's going to phase him because playing at Georgia, you've already faced the gauntlet in the SEC multiple times. You face pretty much, anything the Big Ten is going to throw at you. So if Miami wants to break through to that next level, we saw it in the playoffs, which we'll talk a little more about later, but Clemson and SMU got dismissed pretty quickly. So the teams from the ACC basically didn't really stand much of a chance against the power elites of Miami. Miami needs to make a big leap still to really, truly contend for a national title, kind of the way Notre Dame did. Notre Dame was kind of like that for a while, for many years, where they were, either got in the playoffs, got close, but truly when they got to face one of those big-time teams, didn't really get there. Couldn't really contend, not truly. They finally did that this year. So Miami has to get there. Maybe Carson Beck is the guy that at least sustains them if they keep building around them the way they've been doing with Cam Ward and so on.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the fact that they now have Carson Beck, the fact that they have their quarterback for the 2025 season, I'm intrigued to see what that does for them in terms of talent acquisition from now until the start of the season. You still have the spring transfer portal window. The Hurricanes are very green still at the wide receiver. So again, they lost basically everybody from last year: Restrepo, Jacoby George, Sam Brown, Isaiah Horton, Elijah Arroyo at tight end. They brought in some guys so far with Alex Bowman at tight end, CJ Daniels at wide receiver. I'm really excited to see what JoJo Trader does going into a sophomore year. But as of right now, Carson Beck doesn't have the full arsenal of weapons that Cam Ward had. So I'm interested to see the fact that now that Miami's quarterback situation has the clarity that it needs. Will that help sway another receiver or two that may jump into the portal in spring and help and come to Miami to give Miami just another piece or two for Carson Beck to work with? He's got the entire offensive line. He's got a good run game. But if they can get another receiver or two to complement what they have right now, I think that'll be a big boost for them as they try to keep their offense going from what they did last year.
Yeah, and also, I guess let's look at it from the injury perspective. Is he going to be good by the summer? Is he going to be ready to go by the start of the season? I mean, those questions, I guess we'll see as it plays out. The rest of that quarterback room has to at least be solid just in case, not just for the start of the season, but then what if something else happens to him? I mean, you always want to have quarterback depth, because whether your guy is durable or not. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as we get closer to the fall.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And as it stands right now, when Mario Cristobal talked last week about Carson Beck, he talked, and what he said about the injury is, as of right now, he's ahead of schedule from what the original diagnosis timeline was, which essentially was that he'd be full clear by the end of spring. And no matter what, he should be good for the summer unless there's a setback. So as far as they're concerned with his recovery and his rehab, they're at the point where they feel like at the latest he'll be ready for the start of summer workouts. They think he should be ready before that. Whether he's able to do anything in spring is very unlikely in terms of on-field stuff. But again, the fact that he's here, the fact that he's going to be learning the playbook, he's probably going to be in Shannon Dawson's ear for as long as he can just to make sure he has everything ready to go so that when he is on the field, he's able to make that good first impression. But you're right with the backup quarterbacks, because we saw what Emory Williams was against Iowa State. Granted, he now has another offseason to see if he can do any sort of improvement. I like Luke Nickel, the freshman who they have in this class, but obviously having a true freshman for that type of moment early in his career, I would be hesitant with. But again, the fact they have Carson Beck gives them that little bit of wiggle room as they try to figure out what they have for beyond 2025.
Right, which a guy like Luke Nickel, now you can afford to kind of sit him back, development and all that. That's huge for that part of it, and whoever else you might bring in at this point. Interesting. I mean, Canes fans had that bitter taste from the end of the season, how it went down, missing the playoffs, and then obviously the bowl loss and all of that. And all of a sudden, a breath of fresh air like this comes around. How this happened, Jordan? I mean, a lot of people praising Hannah Cavender for being the school hero online. I know, for convincing him to come here, I guess. I mean, obviously money's involved, of course, always. But hey, they got it done. However they got it done. What have you been seeing and hearing?
Yeah, so both of those things have played a factor. For those who don't know, Carson Beck is dating Hannah Cavender, one of the players on the women's basketball team. Between that, and I first have to give a shout out to the women's basketball Twitter, formerly Twitter account. After Carson Beck's commitment became official, they put out a about 2-minute video going, here are all of Hannah Cavender's assists from the season. And I just thought that was fantastically well done. So very clever, very witty, and yes, great job there. And on the NIL front, the reports are that he's getting between $3 to $4 million from Miami's NIL collective. Just for context there, Cam Ward was getting about $1.5 million. So the price for quarterback is going drastically up. I mean, Duke's quarterback who transferred, I forgot where he went, I think Mississippi State, is reportedly getting $8 million over 2 years. So just the numbers for that quarterbacks are getting right now, it's unbelievable, especially when you consider Carson Beck if he was going to the NFL, he wouldn't be sniffing that total for
That's just
a
crazy.
good bit outside the signing bonus. It's just the fact that he's able to make that money while getting a final year in college, while getting a chance to essentially do what Cam Ward did last year, go from being potentially a late day 2, early day 3 pick to deciding, you know what, I'm going to go back to college, and then elevate his stock to becoming a Heisman finalist and very likely the number 1 overall pick, while getting $1.5 million in other NIL deals on top of that. Yeah, it makes sense for Carson Beck to decide to go back to school for another year.
It's amazing how it's changed the game when you think about that, because unless you're making like Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels money, it's like if you're one of those other quarterbacks that's maybe a little bit lower projected in the draft, college now is more, a sweeter deal in a lot of senses. And look at that SEC money. I mean, Mississippi State, right there. I mean, it's no surprise, but I'm saying, like, again, it kind of that delves into a whole nother discussion about
how
those conferences.
It's not just the quarterbacks too. I think I saw a thing a couple days ago about the number of undergraduates who declare for the NFL draft since since NIL officially became a thing. It's dropped like 50%. Usually it was about like 4 years before NIL. I think it was an average of like 100 to 115 juniors or players who were non-seniors eligible for the draft declaring. This year it was only about 65 or 70. So you see the drop off from guys who were just going to the draft versus guys who may have been fringe guys but in the past, but knew they needed to make their money, versus now knowing they can make money in college while still elevating their stock. It's not just the quarterbacks who are able to do this.
Money, 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 and college football. Oh well, that's the new way of life, and we're still going to be seeing over the next few years how the ripple effects of all of that at so many levels. But I'm curious. Another ripple effect we're curious to see next season is how much this defense improves. And the new head man of that side of the ball is going to be Corey Hetherman, the new defensive coordinator that Miami hired from the Minnesota Golden Gophers from his latest stop. Tell us a little bit about Mr. Hetherman and how much Miami's defense, as well documented as we've talked about ad nauseum, how bad they were, especially toward the end of the season. Mainly, the main reason that unfortunately we weren't seeing Miami's name on that bracket. Instead, we saw SMU and Clemson in there. But what does Corey Hetherman bring? We know a long journey traveled for this coach at the lower levels first, and then now we've seen the success that he's had in the Big Ten, even though not a Big Ten powerhouse where he was, but still facing all those types of teams. We just saw a Big Ten team win the national title last night.
Yeah, so Corey Hetherman, his one season that he was at Minnesota, again, like you said, they're not one of the powerhouses in that conference, but their defense ranked 5th nationally in yards allowed per game, 9th in passing yards allowed per game, and 9th in scoring defense. They averaged less than 17 points per game allowed. And they were really great on 4th down. They held opponents to fewer than 20 points in 8 of their 13 games. And for him, he utilizes a 4-down front, which is what Miami's roster is built for right now, with Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor on the outside, incoming transfer David Blay, and Ahmad Moten on the inside, their main 4 right now. He's very aggressive with his approach. His defense knows how to force turnovers. I think they were 7th nationally in total turnovers. They had 21 total turnovers, 7th nationally with 17 interceptions. There's an emphasis on putting pressure on the quarterback. And the way he described it is, our defense, we're not going to be complex. We're just going to let them go out there and play football. We do that and communicate. We're going to be able to play fast. And that's the name of the game for them. They don't want the players thinking too much. They just want them to know, this is your assignment. Go do it. Get it done right. And as far as his background, I mean, he's been a coach for about 2 decades now, and it started way back at his alma mater at Division III Fitchburg State. And again, I'm going to be saying a lot of school names that I probably am learning and saying for the first time, but he was a quarterback in college, and he was on the offensive side of the ball for the first about half of his career before moving over to linebackers coach and defense side around 2009, about 5 years into his career. So Division III Fitchburg State. Then he also spent 2 seasons overseas. This was interesting for me. He coached American football in Austria and Germany for 2 seasons, which is a little thing that rung in my head. Then he went to Division III Springfield, Northeastern of the FCS.
Springfield. Which Springfield?
I don't know. I don't think we're allowed to say. Good job, Andre. Good job.
Yeah.
That's a Family Guy reference for those who don't know. We're going to be doing a lot more of those in future
And
episodes.
Simpsons.
And The Simpsons, the crossover episode.
Right.
Yeah. 4 years at Old Dominion. And then in 2014 was when he became a defense coordinator for the first time. D2 Pace. Then he spent 3 years apiece at Maine and James Madison. And here's where it becomes interesting in terms of the Cristobal connection. He spent his 2 seasons before going to Minnesota at Rutgers under Coach Greg Schiano, who happened to be the same coach that Mario Cristobal began his coaching career with. And the Schiano coaching tree, at least from Cristobal's perspective, if you're part of the coach staff of Greg Schiano to Cristobal, you're good to go. You're basically vetted at that point. But to see where Hetherman's able to go, for me, to see what he did at Minnesota, and to see how it translates to the roster he'll have with Miami, which is going to have a lot of turnover from last year. We talked the last couple episodes about all the turnover that's happening in the secondary, needed turnover for the most part, I must say. But to see how he's able to translate what he did to what he does in Miami, obviously it's going to be key because Miami's defense was the Achilles heel last year. If the offense is able to do, obviously, I don't think they're going to do exactly what they did last year, leading the nation with almost 50 points a game and over 500 yards. But if the offense is able to hold its own again, they just need the defense to be competent. If the defense is competent, I think it will do wonders for what Miami is able to do next season.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nowhere to go. I feel like there's nowhere to go but up for this defense. Yeah. There really isn't. But that being said, you want them to not just be good, but eventually, if you really want to be serious about trying to win a national title, we saw it in the playoffs. You need to have even the best of defenses sometimes isn't enough. I mean, Notre Dame had a great defense this season and got shredded in that national championship game for the most part when you have superior talent on the offensive side of the ball like Ohio State did. I mean, it has to be one of the best of the best. You have to load up layers of depth. I mean, we saw it over the years when Georgia was dominating, when Alabama was dominating. It has to get to that point for Miami to truly have it. But right now, if we're going to look at it in increments, let's just be competent enough to where it's a team that can win an ACC championship and carry you at least not put so much pressure on having to score 45 points every game practically the way they did last year. That's the first step. And hopefully between Corey Hetherman and the new acquisitions that they're going to have and already have through the portal, maybe this team bolsters enough to at least get closer to that, a lot closer. But again, I just think that there's so much, and I'm not saying anything that's not new to anybody that's been paying attention. This team on that side of the ball is nowhere to go but up, and hopefully it's up, not just a little bit.
Agreed. Yeah, but again, for me, it's let's just see the improvement and see where that takes it.
That's what I mean.
I agree with you. By the time they're competing for national championship, which obviously the hope is sooner rather than later, especially with what they were able to do on the offensive side last year. We see the improvement in his first year. That to me sets a standard, or sets a stride, sets the trajectory for where they need to be going. But to me, I'm for one, just take it one step at a time. And again, their schedule this upcoming season's not going to be easy, especially compared to what they went through this year when they did falter. They got Notre Dame to start the year. They have a much improved UF team. Their ACC schedule is, at least on paper, looks like it's going to be tougher than it was last year. Yeah. So I don't want to say they have to be this ultra dominant defense compared to what they were last year when the schedule is also going to be harder. So
you can go from poor to adequate.
No, I completely agree. And that's why I was saying at the start. Let's see them at least get the basics down right and then move on from there. Which, again, it feels sad that we're saying it from that perspective, but after what we saw last season, I feel like that's to at least be the starting point. Yeah,
especially in the pass defense, especially like you said, if the scheme is more conducive to forcing turnovers, that was much needed last year, especially in the opposing passing games that shredded this secondary left and right. And not even the power conference teams. Everybody pretty much for almost every week it seemed was getting points on this secondary. So we'll see how much they can turn it around. And that takes us to the other crazy topic going on with this team right now that also involves a Big Ten team, Wisconsin in this case. The Xavier Lucas saga is pretty interesting. You know, the former American Heritage standout coming to Miami. Now Miami being accused of tampering by Wisconsin. What's the latest on this ordeal?
Yeah, this is just a complete cluster, just to say the least, just the whole situation. So Xavier Lucas on, let me make sure I have all my dates correct. December 19th.
Timeline.
Yeah. December 19th, he announced on his personal Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, that he planned to enter the transfer portal. About 8 days passed, and he then puts another message out. Hey, Wisconsin's refusing to release me into the portal. I've met all the requirements, and but Wisconsin is impeding my ability to speak with schools. Long story short, on the transfer portal, when a player enters the portal or tells the school he's going to enter the portal, the school has 2 business days to enter his name in if he hits the requirements. Right. So if he tells the school on Monday, they have to put him in by Wednesday. If they tell him on Friday, they have until Tuesday because Saturday and Sunday don't count as business days. So the fact that he went 8 days, that's obviously the tricky part. But what ended up happening over the weekend was he ends up completely unenrolling from Wisconsin and enrolls in Miami. Nothing to do with the transfer portal, nothing to do with the football side, at least not yet, because obviously, read between the lines. That's where he's been trying to go. But his attorney was able to figure that out, and the NCAA basically said, yeah, we don't have any stipulations that say a student can unenroll in one school, enroll in another school, and has to face any consequences. So they found a loophole with that.
And he bypassed the portal, basically.
He bypassed the portal by basically doing everything from the academic route.
Right.
Basically, unenrolling as a student, enrolling as a student. Yes. But Wisconsin, the day after all this unfolds, ends up releasing a statement going, yeah, so on December 2nd, he signed this agreement that basically gives us the rights to his NIL for the next 2 years, which they say was the reason why he couldn't enter the transfer portal was because of this agreement. Mm-hmm. However, at least from my understanding of all of this, that agreement that he signed is something that's related to the House versus NCAA antitrust lawsuit case, which isn't going to be settled until at the earliest April and can't be enforced until, I believe, July. So what they had him sign, or what he did sign, is something that really can't be enforced until the summer, and can only be enforced if he was still a student past the spring semester. He obviously unenrolled before the spring semester started, or he unenrolled before the spring semester ended at the very least. So from that standpoint, it doesn't really seem like Wisconsin has a leg to stand on that side of it. They also said in their statement that they have quote unquote, let me get the exact phrasing, quote unquote, credible information indicating impermissible contact between Xavier Lucas and UM football personnel, which is basically them saying, hey, UM reached out to him before he said he was going to enter the transfer portal. They're tampering with our guy. Stop them.
Right.
But how much, unless they actually have that information to actually show out, whether they're playing a farce or not, we don't know unless they actually show the actual evidence. Whether the NCAA will actually go about any sort of legal action on that, we don't know. But as of right now, Xavier Lucas is enrolled at the University of Miami. There is nothing concrete about his status with the football team, but one would imagine once all of this blows over, he'll be a cornerback on the University of Miami football team.
I mean, interesting. Can this set some sort of like odd precedent? I mean, and now, I mean, that's the thing. I'm sure people are worried. Like, are people going to try these types of loopholes now, bypass the portal and do things like this? Because
it's very likely.
If he gets away with it.
Yeah, and the fact that something like this hasn't happened before, or at least something hasn't happened of this magnitude before, it's honestly pretty surprising that this is the first instance of it this far down the road. But yeah, so it's, again, the NCAA direct statement is they, quote, do not prevent a student athlete from unenrolling from one institution, enrolling at a new institution, and competing immediately. So
it's interesting. It feels like it feels like already like NIL's been here so long, but it really hasn't. And that's the funny part of it, that it's still, only like less than a handful of years into this, and you're still seeing how things are still developing that still haven't happened, that you're like, okay, now what if this starts happening? What if people try to start taking these type of shortcuts?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And the loophole that he used doesn't have anything to do with the NIL. The NIL stuff was really just Wisconsin's attempt to block his transfer. So
Right.
his leaving Wisconsin and going to Miami, that's been in the NCAA guidebook or regulations and all that for years. So that's a route that other people could have used for years now, and it's just a matter of
He used it.
He used it to
Finding
get
it.
out of whatever NIL stuff may or may not be there with Wisconsin. But it's going to be interesting to see how the situation fully unfolds, especially since, again, spring ball starts in about a month and a half. So there is little bit of time to see what develops here, what does or doesn't develop. But the fact that Wisconsin went that far, their statement that they sent out was close to a 300-word statement, basically saying, hey, we're in the right, the kid's in the wrong, the kid shouldn't be able to transfer, yada, 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 yada. And then the Big Ten's released the same right after going, they stand full support with Wisconsin. But it's going to be interesting to see what footing they actually have on this in terms of that NIL agreement, deal, memo of understanding, whatever the actual technical term for it is, what footing they have on that to determine whether or not they were able to actually enforce that.
Right. That's, again, another layer of the NIL era that's beginning to develop, and we're in something new that hasn't been dealt with before. But like you said, it's been sitting there. It's just that Xavier Lucas and those involved figured out a way. So, but it's going to be interesting. Yet another ripple effect of this new era of college football to see where it kind of leads down the road. And maybe Miami gets one of their hometown talents to stick with them. As of right now, it looks like they will. So
yeah, they do.
And at a much needed spot too.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's going to be my next thing. He was between him, Charles Brantley, Emmanuel Carnley, and Ethan O'Connor. That's 4 new corners there, on top of OJ Frederick, on top of Damari Brown, assuming he's able to stay healthy, on top of Jadaeus Richard. That gives you 7 corners right there for 3. So that gives them that 2 deep depth that they frankly didn't have last year. So that's a big boost for them. Based off of the 247's recruiting ranking or transfer rankings, among the top 100 players in the transfer portal, Miami has 7 of them. Carson Beck was obviously number 1. They list Xavier Lucas as 27. Carnley and Brantley were both in the top 100. And their defensive lineman, David Blay, and wide receiver, CJ Daniels, were both in that group as well. So, and safety, Zechariah Poyser. So Miami, more than half of the guys they're getting via transfer are among the top 100 guys who are available this cycle. And 4 of those are in the secondary, which, again, as we've talked about last episode, we've talked about a bunch this episode, Miami really needed to bolster that group. They did that, and now it's a matter of seeing if the talent is able to, if the results are able to live up to the talent that they have.
Well, what did Mario say the other day? If you don't win it at the beginning, now with the transfer portal, it's like you win it the second time around when you circle back.
Yeah. That line was great. There used to be no prize for second place, but now with the transfer portal, there is, because when a guy enters a transfer portal, if you were their number 2, you're probably gonna be their number 1 right now. That he was talking specifically about CJ Daniels with that one, but it really applies to just about any situation on here.
Well, I remember Canes fans very wishful thinking when Jeremiah Smith finally ended up picking Ohio State, and they were like, "Yeah, you never know. There's always the transfer portal." I'm like, And speaking of that, Jeremiah Smith is a national champion as of Monday night. As we're gonna finish our show this week talking about the national title game and looking ahead to next year. Ohio State 34-23 winners over Notre Dame. Kind of an odd game. Notre Dame comes out and just hammers them for 10 minutes and scores. And then it looks like that's the one thing they couldn't hang their hat on, because Ohio State's talent just took over, scored 31 unanswered. And then all of a sudden, Notre Dame gets a score, gets a turnover, starts to make it a ball game. Of course, they go for that field goal, which they missed it. And even if they had made it, I didn't agree with the call. It didn't make any sense at all to me. I mean, threes are not going to beat that team, especially when you're down.
They were still going to need 2 touchdowns after that anyway.
Exactly. Minimum. You needed 3 8s, and realistically, you got to look beyond just the math. Like, this team, the only way they were going to even have a prayer of getting back and potentially winning that game was to get in the end zone, even if you missed the 2. So bad call there, but not a total knock on Marcus Freeman. He did a great job this year. To me, he's coach of the year, what he did to elevate Notre Dame to finally true contender status this year. But Ohio State is the champ, and two teams that Miami fans despise end up battling it out. And one of them, for a long time, Canes, let's just call it. I mean, people know that I'm a grad and all that, but the fans, let's say, probably they're not like seeing Lou Holtz there, even though Lou Holtz now, I don't know how old he is now, but that had to evoke memories of the heyday of battling Notre Dame every season in the 80s and the early 90s, 1990, the last time, before the recent meetings. But we're going to have a rekindling of that a little bit, Jordan, next season. The first game, Notre Dame at Miami. But Canes fans will want to be reminded of the fact that the last time those two played there, Miami thoroughly beat Notre Dame. It was the 10-0 start season. And I'm sure the Irish fans haven't forgotten that. That should be fun. But looking at the playoffs, let's start with this. Let's look at the playoffs as a whole. What can Miami take away from it? I think one thing is you need that upper tier talent in droves the way Ohio State had, because look at that defense Notre Dame had. Look at the running game. And when Will Howard was just like, doop here, doop there, not just a Jeremiah Smith, but the receiving core that Ohio State had, it was just one after the other, just talent on top of talent. And that's still the way it seems you win a national title. I mean, they did it. That was the Alabama formula before. Georgia, Miami still has a ways to go to get to that.
No, I completely agree with that. Again, stacking talent is key. For me, I'm going to just go bigger picture with just the playoffs in general. Just make the field. Because again,
right.
if it was the 14 playoff, your four teams that would have been competing for the title would have been Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State. Notre Dame was number 5. Ohio State was number 6 in the rankings. Number 7 and 8 in the seeding. So just make the field. That's their own fault for losing to Michigan. If they don't lose to Michigan, they're one of the top 2 or 3.
Exactly. But
yeah, so and that's the interesting part of it. If just make the field, and who knows what can happen. Granted, they were still part of the upper tier. They were still part of that upper echelon of teams all season. I've been saying from near the start of the season, I said multiple times when we talked about college football at large, that Ohio State at its best was the best team in the country this year, even after the loss to Oregon, even after a few other close games. I just thought that Ohio State, if they're clicking, is one of the best teams. The fact that because of the 12-team playoff, they were able to show it was big. And again, you look through all the teams that were in the field this year, in terms of the teams that were in the top 8 in the CFP ranking. Ohio State beat all of them except Georgia. They didn't face Georgia. They faced every other team that was in the top 8. They beat Oregon. They beat in the playoffs. They beat Texas. They beat Penn State. They beat Notre Dame. They beat Tennessee. They beat Indiana. That was the top 8 outside of Georgia and Ohio State. So the fact that they were able to get in because of the expanded playoffs, it showed that just because you're a top 4 team at the end of the regular season doesn't mean that you are the team that could be or should be the champion.
And even the game they lost the first time to Oregon on the road at Eugene, and they basically ran out of time. The drive ended at midfield. You give them 30 more seconds, they might have beaten Oregon the first time. And then, of course, the rivalry game at home with Michigan, and stuff happens, and they lose that one. But the Michigan game should have been their one loss this season. And if that had happened, they still would have gotten in and still would have been in the upper tier of the conference. Well, they would have been. I think they still would have qualified for the Big Ten title game had it only been a one loss. So
correct.
There you go.
Yeah. So for me, it's get in, but like Andre said, beyond the talent, your time in the playoffs isn't gonna last long. I mean, again, Jeremiah Smith, absolutely fantastic. He had
Week 1 starter.
Yep. Between him,
I still don't know how he got. I know he had, and it was a bounce back game after he had only 1 catch for 3 yards against Texas. So
and then the other big picture thing, Ohio State, as we've talked about with Andre saying, with needing elite defenses, Ohio State finished the season number 1 in yards allowed per game. They finished number 1 in points allowed per game, averaging less than 13 points allowed per game.
You need
the talent on offense is what's going to get noticed. It's what's going to get the headlines. Defense does win championships, though.
That's the cliche, and it's a cliche for a reason, and you see it at every level. always give me the team that has defense as a base. I think offense, you can stack up little by little after that, but you have to have that as a base. And you don't have to be the number one ranked in the nation, but you got to be pretty darn good. I mean, I'll take one that's pretty close to that at the very least. And again, relating this back to the Hurricanes, I know right now it's got to go from abysmal to at least good. Let's get there, and then, but to ever get to the point where they really want to get to, it has to mirror at least the two defenses from last night. Even if Notre Dame's defense didn't look great last night, but we saw on the way to that game how good it was. In the first 3 victories, that defense played lights out, and even during their entire 14-game winning streak, it's the reason. It's one of the biggest reasons that they got their defense and a solid running game, which Miami did have. I mean, I know we talked so much about Cam Ward, and we're going to be talking about Carson Beck if he lights it up, but it's important for Miami to have that running game again this coming season, the way they had it as a compliment this past season, because again, a running game, that was one of the biggest things that got Notre Dame to the title game.
Yeah, and Miami should have that. I mean, yes, they're losing Damian Martinez, who was fantastic for them in his 1 year, but Mark Fletcher coming back for his junior year. They've got Jordan Lyle, who had some moments as a freshman coming out for his first sophomore year. Chris Wheatley-Humphrey, who was a guy who was great at South Broward in high school, who's going to potentially get to be part of the rotation. And Gerard Pingle from their recruiting class. That gives them 4 solid weapons back there. Fletcher and Lyle, of course, be headlining it with the 1-2 punch, but they should have the steady run game there, which, to go back to Carson Beck, should be able to help open up things for him if they're able to continue the path that they had last year.
Yep. Well, long way to go before Miami, Notre Dame to start the season in September, and then of course, like you said, Miami being Miami Gardens, Hard Rock Stadium, quarterfinal. We'll host a quarterfinal next year, and then the title game itself. So exciting potential season coming up, and like you said, Miami, a gauntlet, a little tougher gauntlet to get there this coming year with Notre Dame to start off. You know, DJ Lagway and the Gators will be a tough obstacle. Like you said, the ACC should be a little bit better, even from the bottom. You know, the rival Seminoles, I'm sure, will be not as bad as 2-10. Virginia Tech, I believe, is on the road. Huh?
I don't think you can get much worse than what the Seminoles were last year.
Yeah, speaking of another team that has nowhere to go but up, apparently, in this, you would think. But Virginia Tech as well. You know, I think they're on. That is a road game too on the schedule next season. Not a lot of road games, but the ones that are road games, not going to be easy. So a challenging slate, and in the next couple of weeks, we'll continue to bring you to talk about off-season developments with this program. Jordan and I, until then, thank you for watching this show. We hope you continue to see it on YouTube and at MiamiHerald.com. Until next time on Eye on the U, for Jordan McPherson, I'm Andre Fernandez. See you guys soon.